Maria had always loved the quiet rhythm of early evenings. The soft hum of the kettle, the gentle clatter of vegetables and the cutting board. The radio playing an old song in the background, it was heavy and at peace. With his and Daniela wait university, the house often felt too still, but she had learned to fill that silence with small rituals. The evening felt no different until the sky suddenly darkened and rain began to pour in heavy sheets, drumming against the windows like impatient fingers. She was reaching for the salt when a sharp head knock broke the quiet. At first, she froze hardly anyone came by unannounced. When the knock came again, loud and distinct, her heart gave a nervous flatte. Wiping her hands on a towel, she walked toward the door, calling out, "WHOICT, no ense." Only another knock, feste, almost desperate cautiously. She opened the door and gasped. Standing on her porch was Ethan, her son, as a best friend, the boy she had seen grow from a shy, polite child into a reserved but bright young man. But at night, he looked nothing like the Ethan she remembered. His clothes were drenched, clinging to his trembling form. His hair dripped water onto the porch. His breathing was uneven, and his eyes held something that jolted her. "Fear Ethan?" Maria whispered. "Stand." What on earth happened? He swallowed hard, as if the simple act of speaking required all the strength he had left. "Mrs. Ramirez, can you come in?" His voice cracked, barely audible over the rain. That simple request, so fragile and uncertain, made her chest tighten. Without another question, she stepped aside and motioned him in. He hesitated before crossing the threshold, as though he feared they didn't belong there. But when he finally stepped into the warm glow of the hallway light, Maria saw even more a bruise darkening his jaw, a small cut on his brow, and unmistakable stiffness of someone in pain. "Sit down," she murmured, guiding him gently toward the kitchen. She grabbed a towel and draped it over his shoulders, her mind spinning with questions she didn't dare ask yet. As he shivered, she poured hot tea into a cup and placed it in front of him. The steam rising between them like a barrier, he wasn't ready to cross for a long moment. He simply stared at the cup, his fingers trembling as they touched the warm ceramic. Maria noticed the wound amid hers. Something inside her, the protective instinct of a mother, stayed awake. "Ethan," she said softly, taking a seat beside him, "you can tell me what happened." His jaw tightened. His eyes flicked up to his for just a heartbeat, but in that heartbeat, she saw everything he was trying to hide. Pain, fear, exhaustion, and something else. Desperation. And in that moment, Maria realized something important. This was no ordinary visit. Ethan was the derby chance. It was running from something, or someone, and whatever it was. It had driven him straight to her door. The warmth of the kitchen seemed to repel Ethan, but his shoulders remained tense, as though he feared letting himself relax. Maria watched him quietly, allowing him space. She knew forcing answers from a shaken young man would only make him retreat further. Instead, she refilled his tea and waited. After several long minutes, Ethan's breathing steadied. He lifted his gaze, and the moment he met hers, whatever fragile composure he had built shattered. His lips trembled, his hands clenched around the cup. And before Maria could speak, a tear slid down his cheek. "I am sorry," he whispered, wiping it quickly, embarrassed. "I didn't want to come here like this." "You did the right thing," Maria assured him softly. "You were safe here. Just tell me what happened." Ethan inhaled shakily, getting his cage. "There was another fight," he began, voice rough. "But this time, it got worse." Maria's pulse quickened, but she said nothing. She let him speak. "My dad came home angry. He'd been drinking since the afternoon." Ethan, his fingers tightened down the cup as though it were anchoring him. He started yelling about school, about how I waste my time, how I am useless. "You know," said Uchel, he forced a dry laugh. But the night wouldn't stop. Maria felt her heart sink. She had always sensed something was wrong in Ethan's home, but she never imagined the reality could be this dark. "He grabbed me," Ethan continued, his voice dropping. "Shot me into the wall. He tried to get away, but he stopped, swallowing hard." Maria saw his bruised jaw again, the small dried cut near his temple, the stiffness in his movements. Each detail told the same story. When he managed to run outside, he said he didn't know where to go. He just kept walking until the rain started. And then he ended up here. His voice broke again. "I know it shouldn't bother you, Mrs. Ramirez, but your house was the only place that felt safe. Even more than my own." Those words struck me deeply. She reached out and gently placed her hand over his. "Ethan, listen to me. You are not a bad. Not today, not ever. I am glad you came." His head lowered as a silent sob shook his shoulders. For a moment, he looked like a frightened child she remembered from years ago, hiding behind Daniel during school pickups. And now, he was a young man carrying wounds he had been forced to hide for far too long. As she stood to get a first aid kit, She noticed the way Ethan flinched when she touched his shoulder. Not from her but from the memory of someone else's hand. While she cleaned his cuts, Ethan remained quiet. But his silence was defiant, now not guarded, but exhausted. Vulnerable when she finished, I whispered. Thank you, Ethan, she said gently. You don't have to go back tonight. Stay here. Rest. We all figure everything out, and added slowly. Relief softening his expression. For the first time that night, Maria saw something new in HM.HOP.AND that alone told her everything she needed to know. This was only the beginning of what he was ready to reveal, terrain heads off into a quiet drizzle. By the time Maya finished and into Ethan's wounds, the house felt unusually still, as though it understood the fragile weight of the moment. Ethan sat at the kitchen table, his hands wrapped around the warm teacup like it was the only thing keeping him grounded. Maria took the seat across from him, giving him space, but refusing to let him retreat into silence again. You don't have to talk more tonight, she offered gently. You've been through enough. But Ethan shook his head. He says, refrained crying, held a determined kind of fear, the kind that comes from someone who had been carrying a truth for far too long now. Should be told you this years ago, whispered Maria as a breath cut. Something in the way he said those words made her sit straight. Ethan took a deep breath. There is something about Daniel I never told you. Immediately, her heart tightened, not in fear, but in weighing as if she could already sense that this wasn't going to be a small confession. When we were 16, Ethan began, staring at the table. He almost died. Maria's lips parted. Stand. Water nodded slowly. His fingers began to shake again. He was at my lowest back then, he continued. My dad was worse than he is now. He barely slept. He was failing classes. He didn't see a way out. His voice wavered. One night, he went to the old bridge near the school. He wasn't planning to go me. A cold chill swept through Maria. Daniel found me. Ethan said, es glistening. I didn't ask how or why. He just sat next to me. For hours. I talked about stupid things, video games, girls in a class, lunch food, anything to keep me present. A small, trembling smile appeared on his lips. I saved my life that night. Maria covered her mouth, tears pushing at hers. Her son, she never knew, but he made me promise not to tell you. Ethan continued. I was afraid you'd away or treat him differently. I said he was just doing what a friend should do. I paused, breath shaking. Mrs. Ramirez, I owe Daniel everything. And big extension. I owe you. Your home, your kindness, the way you always treated me as if he mattered. It kept me alive even when things were bad. Maria's chest tightened painfully. She had no idea Ethan had been fighting a silent battle for so long or that Daniel had carried this secret to protect his friend. He came here tonight because Ethan's voice broke, because he didn't know where else to go. Somehow, this house has always felt safer than my own. I looked at her, then not with fear, but with desperate honesty. He was scared that if he didn't come here, something bad would happen. Maria reached for his hand, her voice thick with emotion. Ethan, you did the bravest thing you could do. You came for help, for the first time that night. Ethan allowed himself to breathe, really breathe as though a vedan, a decade for years, had finally eased. And in that moment, Maria understood this wasn't just a boy seeking shelter, this was a life hanging on the edge, and she was now part of the moment that could change everything. Morning light filtered softly through the curtains, casting a warm glow across the living room where Ethan had finally fallen asleep on the couch. Maria had checked on him several times throughout the night, each time finding him curled up tightly, as if his body feared the relaxing even in safety. She brewed coffee quietly, letting him rest. After everything he had revealed, I needed peace more than anything. But peace didn't last long. Around mid-morning, a fierce knocking rattled the front door. Not a polite knock, not uncertain, but hard, violent, the kind that made the walls tremble. Maria's heart jumped. She headed to the door, a dreadful certainty already forming in her mind when she opened it. The man she feared she would find was standing on her porch. Ethan's father, his clothes were disheveled, his eyes bloodshot with fury, and the smell of stale alcohol clung to him like a second skin. His jaw was clenched so tightly, a vein throbbed in his temple. Where is my son? Snapped, stepping forward aggressively. Maria instinctively blocked the doorway. Es safe, she sighed firmly. And is not going anywhere with you, the man left bitterly. Safe, with you? Let us not pretend you know what is best for him. Evilon se tome, his voice dropped, sharp and threatening. Move. Maria stood her ground. Not for a moment. Silence hung between them, a dangerous, electric silence that warmed up the storm inside him. His eyes darkened. That boy is my responsibility. You don't get to steal him. I am not stealing anyone, Maria replied. I came here on his own. And after what you've done, slammed his palm against the door frame, making her flinch. You think you know what happens in my home? You don't know anything. Behind her, Maria had movement. Ethan had woken up. It appeared that the whole way in trance pale, his breath quickening. The moment his father saw him, his rage flared like gasoline hitting fire. There you are. Ever, trying to shove past Maria. Get your things. No, Ethan froze like a frightened child. His eyes darted to Maria, silently pleading. Maria spread her arms, blocking the entry completely. Is not living with you. Not like this. The man stepped closer, invading her space, his voice a low growl. Move before you need to leave. Maria cut in, reaching for her phone. Right now, what are you gonna do? Call the cops? Go ahead. Let's see who they believe. But Maya had already pressed the emergency number. When he realized she was the bluffing, his mess cracked. Exed loudly, kicking the porch before storming up to his truck. Tires screeched as sped away, disappearing down the road. Maria turned to find it and trembling, tears getting in his eyes. I am sorry, I whispered. I never wanted to drag you into this. She placed her hands gently on his shoulders. Ethan, you didn't drag me into anything. I am here because you deserve someone who refuses to stand aside, a brow down. Collapsing into her arms, not out of weakness, but out of years of held interest finally finding a place to fall apart. For the first time, Ethan understood something he had never known. Someone was finally willing to fight for him, and for Maria. The confrontation with his father confirmed what she already knew. She couldn't let this boy face his darkness. Alone, what happened next would change both their lives. Forever, the house felt strangely calm after the violent confrontation that morning. But the key wasn't peaceful, it was heavy, like the silence that follows a storm. Ethan sat on the edge of the couch, hands clasped tightly together, staring at the floor as if afraid the world might collapse beneath him. Maria watched him from the kitchen doorway, her heart aching. She knew the boy was exhausted in ways that sleep couldn't fix. Over the next few days, Maria did what she always did best. She created steadiness. She made breakfast each morning, gentle meals for a stomach that had been knotted with fear for too long. She left the back door open so the sun and fresh air could fill the house. She talked to Ethan about school, hobbies, anything ordinary to make him feel grounded. Slowly, Ethan began to respond, started helping her with small chores. At first, quietly carrying groceries, sweeping the porch, fixing a loose cabin at hinge. But as the days passed, I spoke more. He left once, softly, as if testing whether he was allowed to. Maria didn't miss the way he seemed surprised by his own levity. The way he glanced at her shyly whenever she complimented him. He was relearning what it felt like to exist without fear. Yet beneath the growing calm, a difficult decision waited for him when a social worker finally arrived, notified automatically. FMA called the police. Ethan tensed immediately. His posture tightened. His eyes darted to the door. Maria sat beside him, offering silent reassurance with her presence. The social worker, a kind woman named Miss Santos, asked gentle questions. Questions Ethan had avoided his whole life. At times he grew quiet, his voice shrinking, but it didn't shut down. Maria's steady gaze gave him strength eventually. Mrs. Santos explained his options. He could eat enome, which both she and Maya knew was dangerous. He could stay temporarily with Maya while arrangements were made door. He could file a report against his father, a step that would protect him in the long term but require testimony. He was sure he had the case to get that night. After Mrs. Santos left, Ethan sat on the porch swing, staring at the darkening sky. Maria joined him, silent at first. She smelled the pine and the pet. I don't know if he can do it, Ethan whispered. What if it makes everything worse? What if he can't save you? What if he says something wrong? Maria placed a gentle hand on his back. Ethan, you've carried his violence alone for years. You deserve a life where you wake up without fear. But whatever you choose, you won't go through it alone. I will be here. Every step his eyes glistened. You mean that? With all my heart, she answered. And in that moment, Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in years. 70. It wasn't just surviving anymore. It was being given a chance to live. As he nodded slowly, Maria knew part of the boy, WHOI terrified on her porch, was beginning to heal. And whatever came next, they would face it together. The hardest choice lay ahead, but so did hope. Months passed. And the memory of that stormy night slowly softened, like a bruise fading from the skin, but never completely forgotten. Ethan's life transformed piece by piece. Testifying against his father was the hardest thing he had ever done. His hands trembled the entire time, his voice cracked more than once, but he didn't face it alone. Maria was there in the front row of the courtroom, steady and shakable, silently reminding him that he was no longer fighting in the dark. His father was ordered into mandatory rehabilitation and placed under strict supervision. It was the perfect resolution, but it was enough to give Ethan safety, enough to give him space to breathe, and in that space, the healing truly began. Ethan remained with Maria throughout spring and Elisame. At first he moved carefully through the house, as though afraid he might one day wake up and find it all gone. But eventually the caution melted away. The house no longer felt like a refuge. It felt like home, a cooked dinner with her aunt's days. A planted flowers along the walkway. A fixed things before she even noticed they were broken. Every day he grew a little taller, not physically, but in presence, in confidence, in peace. The haunted look in his eyes faded, replaced with something softer, bright, and Maria watched all of this with quiet pride. She had raised one son, but without ever expecting it. She found herself guiding a second one through the parts of life that had tried to swallow him whole. Then the letter it was from the college then Yal attended. Ethan had applied months earlier, encouraged by Maya, and secretly inspired by Daniel's early kindness. Not only had he been accepted, he was offered a partial scholarship. When he read the letter, he didn't speak at first. He just stared at it, his eyes filling with tears. Maria stepped forward and hugged him, holding him tightly as he finally allowed himself to believe in a future he once thought didn't deserve, and so. One warm August morning, Ethan stood in the doorway at Maria's house with a small suitcase in his hand, not running from danger this time, but stepping towards something new. Daniel had returned from university for the weekend, and when Ethan saw him, set to embrace in a way that spoke more than words ever could. Daniel looked at his mother afterward, shining with emotion. Mom, thank you, I said softly, for everything you did for him. Maria smiled, brushing at her away. I saved you 11. I guess it was my 10. Before leaving, Ethan turned back one estime. I walked toward Maya and hugged her with a depth that came from gratitude too big to express. I never forget what you did for me, I whispered. This house you changed my life. Maria held him a moment longer. Just promise me one thing, she said. Build a life you're proud of. I will, I replied, smiling for self-esteem with genuine, unguarded joy. And with that, Ethan stepped into a new chapter, not broken, not afraid, but finally free. The night he showed up at her door had changed everything for both of them.